Welcome to the Podkey summary of Kootenay River. Today's story is a river that can't quite stay in one country, one spelling, or one era. The Kootenay in Canada, the Kootenai in the United States, is a border-crossing river with deep indigenous history, a landscape shaped by ice, and a modern life shaped by dams, industry, and recreation. It's also a good example of how a river can be many things at once: a homeland, a trade route, a boomtown engine, a power source, and a place where every big solution seems to come with a cost. The basic map of this river is a little strange in the best way. It runs about 781 kilometers, drains more than 50,000 square kilometers, and even though over 70% of that watershed is in British Columbia, it's still the Columbia River's third largest tributary by both watershed size and discharge. Near Canal Flats, it passes within roughly 2 kilometers of Columbia Lake, which is the headwaters of the Columbia River. So the Kootenay starts incredibly close to the Columbia, then heads south into the United States, swings west through Idaho, and then turns back north into Canada before finally joining the Columbia. And yes, the name changes with the border. It's usually Kootenai in Canada and Kootenai in the US, reflecting both national usage and different indigenous communities. Even the spelling tells you this is a shared river, not a neatly contained one. Long before surveyors and dams, the Kootenai were the first people along this river. They used it for fishing, hunting, travel, and seasonal movement, which makes the river less like a line on a map and more like the structure of everyday life. Their language is considered an isolate, which means it isn't closely related to surrounding language families. That's often linked to the way the Rocky Mountains help create a kind of cultural and linguistic separation. The river itself has carried several names. One Kootenai name, Akinmiluk, simply means river. Another, Akukotlakatlo, has a meaning that isn't fully clear now. Other peoples and Europeans also called it the Flatbow River. And Kootenai may mean water people, or possibly deer robes, from an Algonquian language. What really stands out is the Kootenai creation tradition, which describes the people as having been created to care for and protect the land. That is a very different starting point from the later extractive mindset that treated the river mainly as something to mine, regulate, or reroute. A lot of the Kootenay's present-day landscape was built by ice. Around 15,000 years ago, the Cordilleran ice sheet blocked the outlet of what is now Kootenay Lake, backing water up toward present-day Libby, Montana, and possibly even linking it with an enlarged Lake Pend Oreille. Later, glacial sediments buried the river's old channel and created a natural dam where the river exits Kootenay Lake. When the ice finally retreated, the lake dropped to its current level and the Kootenay Flats emerged. You can still read some of that history in the river's shape. It drops more than 2,000 meters from its headwaters to the Columbia, starting in rugged, bedrock-controlled channels, and then easing into broader meandering valleys where sediments pile up and the river has more room to wander. The early colonial record has its own messiness. David Thompson, one of the great map makers of the region, got tangled up in confusion around Columbia Lake. At first, he mistook the Columbia's northern outlet for the Kootenay and used the name McGillivray's River for what he later understood was actually the Kootenay. Then came the rushes in 1863. The Wild Horse Gold Rush pulled somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 prospectors to the confluence of the Wild Horse and Kootenay rivers. Fisherville boomed fast, then faded when the richest deposits turned out to be less extensive than people hoped. Silver and Galena followed and helped build a whole chain of boomtowns, including Nelson, Caslow, New Denver, Silverton, Slocum City, and Sandon railroads, and some brief steamboat routes reshaped trade through the region, which is a polite way of saying the map got rewritten again whenever money moved. The Kootenay did have a steamboat era, but it only lasted about 28 years. Rapids, falls, rough glacier-fed water, declining mines, and the arrival of railways made the whole thing hard to sustain. Two early vessels, the Duchess and the Klein, sank before they even reached Canal Flats, which feels like a review of the business model. There was also an ambitious 2-kilometer canal, the Bailey-Groman Canal, built to connect the Kootenay with Columbia Lake. But the lock was damaged, the canal never really proved practical, and only a few vessels used it. When the North Star made its passage in 1902, that more or less marked the end of commercial steamboat navigation on the river. At the river's mouth, another chapter opened in 1909, when the Doukhobors founded Brilliant. It became a large communal settlement with orchards, sawmills, running water, a brick factory, and a suspension bridge. But internal conflict, arson, debt, land loss, and the 1924 dynamite assassination of leader Peter Verigen pushed the community into decline. In the modern era, the river is heavily managed. 7 dams on the Kootenay were built for electricity, flood control, and water regulation, but none of them provides navigation or fish passage. Upstream of Kootenay Lake, most of the river still flows freely except for Libby Dam, which created the long Lake Kootenai Reservoir. The Columbia River Treaty tied Canada and the United States together on flood control and hydropower. Duncan Dam is especially notable because it stores water for regulation without generating power itself. And Kootenay Basin reservoirs account for nearly half of the storage in all Columbia River Treaty reservoirs. That control changed the river dramatically. The old extreme spring floods were reduced, but fertile land was flooded. More than 2,000 people were displaced. Fish migration was disrupted, and flow patterns became less natural. This is the recurring Kootenay story. More stability for one purpose, more damage somewhere else. One proposed change near Canal Flats would have diverted Kootenay water into the Columbia to boost power generation and help reclaim the flood-prone Kootenay Flats. It never happened because residents and environmentalists pushed back, warning it would hurt tourism, riverside communities, and the upper Kootenay's water supply. It matters because the Kootenay Flats were once a major wetland system supporting more than 1 million migratory birds every year. Dikes, agriculture, and altered water levels changed much of that landscape. Fish have also paid the price for fragmentation. Kootenai Falls and Libby Dam divide fish populations, and altered flows may have contributed to declines in sturgeon and other species. One remarkable exception is the landlocked Kootenai salmon in the upper basin, which appear to survive there because an ancient flood once let salmon bypass the old barrier at Canal Flats. Economically, the region has kept reinventing itself. It moved from fur trade, mining, logging, and steamboat transport toward tourism, especially in the West Kootenay. The East Kootenay still has a major coal story. Since 1898, the area has produced more than 500 million tons, and it supplies roughly 25% of the world's steel-making coal. The watershed is still overwhelmingly forested, more than 90%, but only about 10% is considered unaffected by some form of lumber industry development. Roads have fragmented a lot of terrain that might otherwise feel truly remote. At the same time, this is now a big recreation landscape. People come for trout fishing, canoeing, hiking, boating, and whitewater rafting. Jennings Canyon offers Class 4+ rapids, while Kootenai Falls drops about 17 meters and is very rarely navigated safely, which is probably a good place to respect the river and keep your adventurous impulses modest. The Kootenai is one of those rivers that makes simple stories impossible. Its geography crosses borders, its history crosses worldviews, and its future still seems to hinge on how much control people try to exert over a river that has always had a mind of its own. And honestly, for a river that nearly brushes the Columbia and then takes the scenic route through 2 countries, that feels pretty on brand. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.